Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. I'd been living in that double-wide trailer outside Dardanelle for about 3 months when everything went to hell. Me and my 2 kids, Kayla, 9 years old, and Brandon, 12, had moved there after my divorce got finalized. The place sat on 40 acres of leased farmland, surrounded by nothing but cotton fields and the occasional cluster of pine trees. Mr. Hutchinson, the landowner, practically begged us to take it after the previous family vanished without notice. $400 a month for a 3-bedroom trailer seemed like a blessing at the time. He was this weathered old guy who always wore the same faded overalls and spoke in short, clipped sentences, like words cost him money. That particular Thursday in August started out sweltering hot, the kind of day where the air feels thick as molasses and even the grasshoppers seem too tired to jump. I remember getting home from my shift at the turkey processing plant around 4:30, my uniform still reeking of raw poultry and industrial disinfectant. The kids were already inside, Brandon playing some zombie game on his Xbox, while Kayla sat at the kitchen table drawing horses in her sketchbook. She'd gotten really good at drawing that summer, filling notebook after notebook with pictures of Arabian stallions and wild mustangs. The AC unit in the living room window was struggling against the heat, making this awful grinding noise every few minutes that I kept meaning to get fixed, but never had the extra cash for. Around 6 o'clock, I noticed the light outside had turned this weird greenish-yellow color, like the sky was bruised. Through the kitchen window, I could see the cotton plants in the field bending almost sideways in the wind, their white bowls dancing like popcorn in a hot pan. The weather app on my phone showed nothing unusual, just typical August thunderstorms predicted for later that evening. I started making dinner, boxed mac and cheese with cut-up hot dogs, while the kids bickered about whose turn it was to set the table. The first rumble of thunder came just as I was draining the pasta, deep and prolonged, like a freight train grinding its brakes somewhere far away. By 7:30, the wind had picked up something fierce. Our trailer started creaking and groaning in ways I'd never heard before, even though we'd weathered plenty of storms since moving in. The lights flickered twice, then went out completely. I grabbed the flashlight from under the sink and told the kids to stay put while I checked the breaker box. That's when I heard it. This roaring sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once, like standing inside a jet engine. Kayla started crying, and Brandon's face went pale in the flashlight beam. The whole trailer was shaking now, dishes rattling in the cabinets, and I could hear things hitting the roof, branches, debris, God knows what else. I screamed for the kids to get in the bathtub. It was the only thing I could think of from those tornado safety videos they showed at their school. We stumbled down the narrow hallway, the flashlight beam bouncing wildly as the trailer rocked back and forth. Brandon helped Kayla climb in first, then squeezed in behind her. I was just about to join them when the whole world turned upside down. The floor beneath my feet suddenly wasn't there anymore, and I felt myself flying sideways, slamming into the bathroom doorframe. The sound of metal tearing and glass shattering filled my ears as our home literally came apart around us. I managed to grab onto the edge of the tub just as everything went airborne. The next few seconds lasted forever. I remember the sensation of weightlessness, like being on a roller coaster that had jumped its tracks. Then came the impact, a bone-jarring crash that knocked the wind out of me. The trailer hit the ground on its side, then kept rolling. I lost my grip on the tub and got thrown into what used to be the ceiling, now a wall. Everything was chaos. Insulation raining down, furniture sliding past, the kids screaming. When we finally stopped moving, I was pinned under part of the kitchen cabinet, my ribs screaming in pain. I could hear Brandon sobbing somewhere nearby, calling for me. But Kayla wasn't making any sound at all. Fighting through the pain, I managed to push the cabinet off me and crawl toward Brandon's voice. The flashlight was gone, but lightning flashes through the twisted window frames gave me glimpses of the destruction. Our home had been completely mangled, Walls caved in, the roof partially torn away, rain pouring through gaps in the wreckage. I found Brandon wedged between the overturned refrigerator and what was left of the hallway wall. His arm was bent at a wrong angle, but he was conscious, tears streaming down his dirt-covered face. "Mom, I can't find Kayla," he kept saying over and over. That's when I saw it. A section of the trailer's metal frame had collapsed, creating a pocket of crushed space near where the bathroom used to be. I crawled toward that spot, calling Kayla's name, my voice barely audible over the storm. Through a gap in the twisted metal, I could see her pink sneaker, the one with the unicorn laces she'd picked out for her birthday. The entire weight of the trailer's frame was resting on that section. I grabbed at the metal, trying to lift it, pull it, anything, but it wouldn't budge. My phone was somewhere in the wreckage, probably shattered. The nearest neighbor, the Hendersons, lived 3 miles down the road. I told Brandon to keep talking to his sister, to tell her I'd be right back, that I was going to get help. He nodded through his tears, his good arm reaching toward where his sister lay trapped. Crawling out through a hole where the living room window used to be, I stumbled into the storm. The rain hit like needles, and the wind nearly knocked me down before I'd taken 3 steps. Our truck was gone, probably thrown somewhere out in the cotton field. I started running down the muddy driveway, slipping and falling every few yards, my broken ribs making each breath feel like swallowing glass. The road was littered with debris, tree limbs, pieces of metal siding, someone's mailbox wrapped around a fence post. Lightning illuminated the devastation in horrible snapshots. I kept running, my bare feet bleeding from stepping on broken glass and twisted metal. The image of that pink sneaker burned into my mind. It took me almost an hour to reach the Henderson farm. Their house was still standing, lights glowing warmly through the rain. I pounded on their door, screaming incoherently about my babies, about the trailer, about needing help now, right now, please God, right now. Mr. Henderson called 911 while his wife wrapped a blanket around me. But the dispatcher said all emergency units were already out on calls. The tornado had cut a path of destruction across 3 counties. It would be at least another hour before anyone could reach us. Henderson drove me back in their pickup while her husband followed with tools, rope, anything he could think of that might help. The whole ride back, I kept praying, making deals with God, promising anything if he'd just let my baby girl be okay. When we got back to what was left of our home, Brandon was still there, still talking to his sister through the wreckage, his voice hoarse from calling her name. "Mister." Henderson tried everything, a car jack, crowbars, even attempted to hook a chain to his truck to pull the frame away. Nothing worked. The metal groaned and shifted but wouldn't lift. I squeezed myself into the small gap, managing to touch Kayla's hand. It was cold, so cold, despite the August heat. I held it and sang her favorite lullaby, the one about mockingbirds and diamond rings, while we waited for help that came too late. The paramedics arrived 2 hours and 17 minutes after the tornado hit. They used hydraulic equipment to lift the frame. They tried to revive her, but my baby girl had been gone for a while by then. 3 days later, while I sat in the hospital with Brandon, a reporter came by with questions about the storm. That's how I learned the emergency warning siren for our area, the one mounted on a tower just 2 miles from our trailer, had been broken for 13 months. The county knew about it but hadn't allocated funds for repairs. If that siren had worked, if we'd had even 5 more minutes of warning, maybe I could have gotten the kids to the storm cellar at the abandoned Watson farm down the road. Maybe Kayla would still be drawing her horses. The county commissioner sent a letter of condolence and a promise to fix all broken sirens immediately. I kept that letter. Sometimes I take it out and stare at it, at all those empty words that came too late to save my little girl. I still can't drive past a dairy farm without thinking about what happened to my college roommate, Jake Sullivan. It was the summer of 2015, and we'd just finished our sophomore year at UW-Madison. While I headed home to Milwaukee to work at my dad's hardware store, Jake stayed in Wisconsin to work on the Brennan Dairy Farm near Sheboygan. He was 20 years old, studying agricultural science, and desperate to get some real farm experience under his belt. I remember helping him move his stuff into the small apartment above the farm's equipment shed. Mr. Brennan, the owner, was this weathered old guy in his 70s who walked with a limp and seemed grateful to have the help. The farm wasn't massive, maybe 80 head of cattle, but with just him and one full-time employee named Carl, they were clearly overwhelmed. Jake was thrilled about the job, texting me constantly that first week about learning to milk cows and operate the equipment. The last time I saw Jake alive was when I drove up to visit him after his second week on the job. It was a Saturday afternoon, and he was buzzing with excitement about impressing Mr. Brennan. We grabbed beers at a local bar, and he kept talking about how he wanted to prove himself, to show he wasn't just another soft college kid. He mentioned this concrete hatch near the main barn that everyone avoided, some kind of underground manure storage tank. Carl, the other worker, had warned him to stay away from it, said it hadn't been properly cleaned in years. But Jake had this look in his eyes, the same one he got before doing something stupidly brave, like when he climbed the campus bell tower freshman year. I bet if I volunteered to clean that thing out, Brennan would be impressed as hell, he said, finishing his third beer. I told him it sounded dangerous, that there was probably a reason nobody wanted to go near it. He just laughed and changed the subject to some girl from his soil science class. 3 days later, on Tuesday morning, I got a call from Jake around 7:30. He sounded pumped up, said he'd just offered to clean out the slurry pit, and Mr. Brennan had seemed genuinely surprised and grateful. Carl tried to talk me out of it, Jake said, and I could hear him walking, probably heading toward the barn. But Brennan said if I really wanted to help, he wouldn't stop me. He's getting me some old coveralls and rubber boots from the storage room. I had a bad feeling about it, and tried to convince him to wait, maybe research proper safety procedures first. But Jake was already set on it. He said the pit hadn't been emptied in almost 3 years because Brennan couldn't afford to hire the specialized cleaning crew that usually handled it. How dangerous can it be? I'll just go down, shovel out what I can reach and come right back up, he said. The casual way he talked about it made my skin crawl. What I learned later, from the investigation reports and news articles, was that Jake had no idea what he was walking into. Slurry pits on dairy farms are basically underground concrete tanks where all the cow manure, urine, and wash water collects. As that waste breaks down, it produces several toxic gases: hydrogen sulfide, ammonia, carbon dioxide, and methane. The methane is particularly dangerous because it's odorless and displaces oxygen. In a confined space like an underground tank, the concentration can be lethal within minutes. Proper cleaning requires specialized ventilation equipment, gas monitors, and often supplied air respirators. Some farmers even use remote-controlled equipment to avoid sending anyone down there at all. But Jake didn't know any of this, and apparently neither did Mr. Brennan. Or if he did, he didn't share that information. The old farmer just handed Jake those coveralls and boots, maybe mentioned holding his breath, and let a 20-year-old kid climb down a rusty ladder into what was essentially a death trap. Carl later testified that he was in the milking parlor when he heard Mr. Brennan shouting Jake's name repeatedly. By the time Carl ran to the slurry pit, the old farmer was standing at the open hatch, looking down into the darkness and yelling frantically. Jake had been down there for maybe 5 minutes, Carl said, when they'd heard a splash and then nothing. The pit was about 12 feet deep and 8 feet wide, with 3 years' worth of semi-liquid manure filling it about halfway. Carl said he started to climb down after Jake, but the smell hit him like a physical force, not just the stench of manure, but something chemical and wrong that made his lungs burn. He made it down 2 rungs before his vision started spinning, and he had to scramble back up, gasping for clean air. Mr. Brennan was already on his cell phone calling 911, but the nearest fire department with confined space rescue equipment was 45 minutes away. According to the coroner's report, Jake likely lost consciousness within 2 to 3 minutes of entering the pit. The methane concentration at the bottom was later measured at over 300,000 parts per million. Anything over 50,000 is considered immediately dangerous to life. He would have felt dizzy first, maybe tried to climb back up but found his muscles not responding properly. The hydrogen sulfide would have burned his throat and eyes while the lack of oxygen made his brain foggy. He probably fell backward into the slurry, and even if he'd managed to keep his head above the surface, he was already breathing poison with every gasp. The volunteer firefighters who arrived first couldn't do anything but wait for the specialized team. One of them, a guy named Kevin who'd gone to high school with Jake, told me later that they could see Jake's body floating face down in the muck, his bright blue t-shirt visible in their flashlight beams. They tried lowering a rope, hoping maybe he'd grab it, but everyone knew it was too late. The specialized rescue team finally arrived with full breathing apparatus and ventilation fans. It took them another hour to set up the equipment and safely retrieve Jake's body. By then, Carl had told them about the warning he'd given Jake, and the firefighters were already asking Mr. Brennan hard questions about safety equipment and ventilation systems. The old farmer kept repeating that he'd never had problems before, that his father had built that pit in the 1960s, and they'd always just held their breath when they needed to check on it. He seemed genuinely shocked that the gases could kill someone so quickly. But when OSHA investigators arrived 2 days later, they discovered something that changed everything. There were supposed to be ventilation fans installed on any slurry pit over a certain size. It had been law in Wisconsin since 2008. Mr. Brennan had even received a warning letter about it 3 years earlier, complete with detailed requirements for the ventilation system and a deadline for compliance that had long passed. I attended every day of the trial that followed. Mr. Brennan's lawyer argued that the old man hadn't understood the severity of the danger, that he was barely keeping the farm afloat financially, and couldn't afford the $10,000 ventilation system. They brought in character witnesses who testified about his generosity, how he donated milk to food banks and helped neighbors during tough times. But the prosecutor had Jake's parents there every day too, and photos of Jake at his high school graduation, at our dorm move-in day, holding his baby nephew at Christmas. The prosecutor showed the court Mr. Brennan's signed acknowledgement of the OSHA warning letter, proved he'd understood exactly what was required and had chosen to ignore it. They presented evidence that he'd spent $15,000 on a new pickup truck 6 months after receiving that letter, while telling inspectors he couldn't afford safety equipment. The jury took less than 3 hours to convict him of criminally negligent homicide. Mr. Brennan got 5 years in prison, though he only served 2 before being released on health grounds. The farm was sold to cover the wrongful death settlement with Jake's family. I heard Carl found work at another dairy operation up near Green Bay, one with proper safety protocols. Sometimes I drive past where the Brennan farm used to be. It's a housing development now, neat little ranch homes with suburban lawns where the pastures used to be. There's no trace of the barn or that concrete hatch that became Jake's tomb. But I know exactly where it was. Could walk to that spot with my eyes closed. Jake's parents created a scholarship fund in his name for agricultural safety education at UW-Madison. Every year, they require recipients to take a special course on confined space hazards in farming. His mom told me once that if even one kid learns to question unsafe practices, to refuse dangerous work, then maybe Jake's death meant something. I still have nightmares about that phone call sometimes, hearing Jake's excited voice telling me about his plan to clean the pit. In my dreams, I convince him not to do it, or I drive up there and physically stop him from going down that ladder. But I always wake up to the same reality where my best friend died at 20 years old, suffocated in cow shit because an old man thought he knew better than safety regulations. The worst part is how preventable it was. A proper ventilation system, a gas monitor, even just a simple fan could have saved Jake's life. Carl told me later that after the recovery team ventilated the pit and pumped it out, they found Jake's cell phone at the bottom, cracked, but somehow still working. His last outgoing call was to me that morning, telling me about his big plan to impress the boss. There were 16 missed calls after that. From me, from his parents, from his girlfriend, all while he was already gone, floating in that toxic darkness. The thing that haunts me most is that Jake died trying to be helpful. He wasn't being reckless or showing off. He genuinely thought he was doing something good, something that would make him valuable to his employer. He wanted so badly to prove he was more than just a college kid playing farmer for the summer. In his agricultural safety courses, they'd covered equipment hazards, chemical storage, livestock handling, but nobody had specifically warned him about slurry pits. How many other farm kids are out there right now, eager to help, willing to take on any task to prove themselves, with no idea they're one wrong decision away from disaster? After the trial, Jake's dad gave me a box of his things from the apartment above Brennan's equipment shed. His textbooks were still bookmarked to chapters on soil management, his notebook full of observations about the daily farm operations, sketches of the barn layout, feed schedules he'd memorized. On the last page, dated the morning he died, he'd written, "Ask Mr. B about winter prep for slurry system. Volunteer to help?" I graduated the following year and ended up working for an agricultural safety consulting firm. It wasn't what I'd planned, but after Jake, I couldn't imagine doing anything else. Part of my job involves inspecting dairy operations, and I've lost count of how many slurry pits I've seen that are just like the one that killed Jake. No ventilation, no gas monitors, no warning signs, just a concrete hatch and decades of, "We've always done it this way." Some farmers get defensive when I explain the regulations, tell me they've been managing just fine without all this expensive equipment. I show them Jake's photo then, tell them about the scholarship recipient studying in his name, about his parents who still can't drive through Wisconsin without crying. Usually that changes their tune. The ones who don't listen get reported to OSHA immediately. I don't care if it costs them money or makes me unpopular. Jake doesn't get a second chance, but maybe some other eager kid will, thanks to a ventilation fan installed, because someone finally enforced the rules that were written in blood. Living out on 40 acres in rural Kansas taught me a lot about being self-sufficient. 4 years ago, when my husband Greg and I bought the property outside Topeka, we thought we'd struck gold. The previous owners left behind a treasure trove of farming equipment in the old red barn. Tractors, plows, seeders, things we had no idea how to use. We kept chickens and a couple horses, but we weren't farmers by any stretch. Greg worked in insurance, traveling 3 or 4 days a week to meet clients across the Midwest. I ran my graphic design business from home, enjoying the peace and quiet that came with country living. The nearest neighbor was half a mile down the gravel road, and that's exactly how we liked it. That morning in early April started like any other. Greg had left before dawn for a conference in Oklahoma City, kissing me goodbye while I pretended to still be asleep. Around 9, I decided it was finally time to clear out some of that old equipment gathering dust in the barn. We'd been talking about it for months, and with spring cleaning fever hitting me hard, I grabbed my phone and started taking pictures. The John Deere seeder looked ancient but solid. There was a disc harrow that seemed to be in decent shape, and a cultivator that had definitely seen better days. I posted everything on Facebook Marketplace with reasonable prices. Wasn't looking to get rich, just wanted the space back. Within an hour, my phone started pinging with interested buyers. Most messages were typical. Lowball offers, people asking if I'd deliver 2 hours away, folks wanting to trade for things I didn't need. But one caught my attention. A guy named Robert said he and his brother were starting a small farm operation near Salina, about an hour west. They were interested in the seeder and cultivator, willing to pay full asking price, cash in hand. Could they come by that afternoon around 3? His profile looked legitimate enough. Middle-aged guy, pictures with what looked like family, member since 2014. I messaged back saying 3 worked perfectly. He responded immediately, asking for the address and confirming they'd be driving a white Ford F-250 with a trailer. Professional, polite, exactly the kind of buyer you hope for when selling online. The dog started barking around 2:45, earlier than expected. Our 2 German shepherds, Max and Bella, always announced visitors long before they reached the house. Through the kitchen window, I watched a white pickup truck rolling slowly up our long driveway, dust cloud trailing behind it. They'd brought a decent-sized trailer, which made sense for hauling the equipment. 2 men got out, one tall and lean wearing a faded Carhartt jacket, the other shorter and stockier in a baseball cap. The tall one waved as he approached the porch, and I noticed he walked with a slight limp. The shorter one hung back by the truck, lighting a cigarette. Something about their body language seemed tense, but I chalked it up to them being tired from the drive. "You must be Robert," I said, stepping out onto the porch. The tall one nodded, but didn't offer to shake hands. "That's right. This is my brother Dale." He gestured toward the shorter man, who gave a brief nod without moving closer. "Beautiful property you got here. Real peaceful." His eyes weren't looking at the property, though. They were scanning the windows of the house, the driveway behind them, the fields stretching out on either side. I felt a flutter of unease but pushed it down. City girl paranoia, I told myself. These were just country folks checking out the lay of the land. "The equipment's all in the barn," I said, pointing to the red structure about 50 yards from the house. "Want to head over and take a look?" Robert nodded again, and Dale finally moved away from the truck, flicking his cigarette into the gravel. The barn felt cooler inside, that familiar smell of old hay and motor oil hitting me as we entered through the side door. Dust particles danced in the shafts of afternoon light streaming through gaps in the wooden slats. I led them past the horse stalls where our 2 mares, Penny and Sugar, watched us with mild interest. The equipment was stored in the back section, covered in tarps I'd pulled off that morning for the photos. "Here's the cedar," I started, but Robert had stopped walking. He stood between me and the door we'd entered through while Dale moved to my other side. The atmosphere shifted instantly, like the air before a thunderstorm. Dale reached into his jacket pocket, and I saw the glint of metal as he pulled out a folding knife, flicking it open with practiced ease. "Here's how this is gonna go," Robert said, his polite demeanor evaporating. His voice was different now, harder, colder. "You're gonna give us your car keys and whatever cash you got in the house. Then we're all gonna take a nice walk back there. Real calm-like." Time seemed to slow down as my mind raced through options. The main barn door was padlocked from the outside. I'd done that myself this morning out of habit. The side door they'd blocked was the only other exit except for the opening between the horse stalls that led to the small paddock outside. It was maybe 15 feet away, but Dale stood directly in my path, that knife catching the light as he shifted his weight. "I don't keep cash here," I heard myself say, surprised at how steady my voice sounded. "And my car keys are in the house. I can go get them." Robert actually laughed at that, a harsh bark that echoed in the barn's rafters. "Nice try, sweetheart. We're all going together. Dale, grab her arm." As Dale stepped forward, I did the only thing I could think of. I ducked low and charged straight at him, ramming my shoulder into his midsection like I was back playing high school field hockey. The impact sent Dale stumbling backward into a stack of old fence posts, his knife clattering across the concrete floor. I didn't stop to see if he was down. I bolted toward the horse stalls, hearing Robert's curses and heavy footsteps behind me. Penny snorted and backed away as I vaulted over the stall's half door, landing hard in the soft bedding. My ankle twisted slightly, but adrenaline pushed me forward through the narrow opening between stalls. Behind me, Robert was shouting at Dale to get up to block the other side. I squeezed through the gap that led outside, scraping my arms on the rough wood, and found myself in the small paddock. Without thinking, I grabbed the heavy sliding bolt on the outside of the stall door and shoved it home, then did the same with the paddock gate's latch. They were locked in. My whole body was trembling as I backed away from the barn, hearing them pounding on the walls, their shouts muffled but furious. I ran to the house faster than I'd ever moved in my life, fumbling with my phone as I went. My fingers wouldn't work right. It took 3 tries to unlock the screen and dial 911. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher's calm voice seemed surreal against the chaos in my head. 2 men tried to rob me. They're locked in my barn. They had a knife, I gasped out, giving her the address between ragged breaths. "Are you safe now, ma'am? Are you inside your house?" I reached the back door, slamming it behind me and throwing the deadbolt. Yes, I'm inside. They came about buying farm equipment, but they pulled a knife on me in the barn." Through the kitchen window, I could see their white truck still parked in my driveway. "Officers are on the way. Stay on the line with me," the dispatcher said. I grabbed Greg's shotgun from the hall closet, checking that it was loaded even though I'd only fired it once at clay pigeons. The next 20 minutes felt like hours. I sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets, shotgun across my lap, phone pressed to my ear as the dispatcher kept me talking. She asked about the men's descriptions, their vehicle, what exactly had happened. I could still hear occasional banging from the barn, though it had gotten quieter. Part of me worried they'd find a way out. Old barns always had loose boards somewhere. But mostly I just kept picturing Dale's knife, the casual way he'd opened it, like he'd done this before. When I finally heard sirens in the distance, I started crying. Not from fear anymore, but from sheer relief. 3 sheriff's cars came flying up the driveway, dust swirling everywhere. I set the shotgun on the counter and met them at the door, my legs barely holding me up. "They're in the barn," I managed to say, pointing with a shaking hand. I locked them in through the horse stall. The deputies approached the barn with weapons drawn, ordering whoever was inside to come out with hands visible. For a moment, there was silence. Then Robert's voice, trying to sound innocent. "Officers, this is a misunderstanding. This crazy woman locked us in here for no reason." One deputy stayed with me while the others surrounded the barn. They eventually got the men out, both looking considerably less threatening in handcuffs. Dale had a nasty bruise forming on his ribs where I'd hit him, and Robert's nice guy mask had completely disappeared. As they were led to separate patrol cars, the lead deputy, a woman named Officer Torres, took my full statement. "You did exactly the right thing," she told me. "That was quick thinking with the horse stall." She then delivered news that made my knees weak all over again. "We ran their plates on the way here. That truck was reported stolen from Wichita 2 days ago." The investigation that followed revealed something even more disturbing. Robert and Dale, not their real names of course, were serial predators who'd been working across Kansas for months. They specifically targeted women selling farm equipment or livestock online, showing up when they knew the sellers would be alone. I was the 5th woman they'd approached, but the first to escape and get them caught. The other victims had been robbed of cash, vehicles, and in one case seriously injured when she tried to resist. They'd kept detailed notes in their truck about potential targets, including several more women they'd been planning to visit. I had to testify at their trial 8 months later, reliving that afternoon in detail. They both got 15 to 20 years. Greg installed security cameras the week after it happened, and we got a 3rd German Shepherd. I still sell things online occasionally, but never when I'm alone. And I always meet buyers in the parking lot of the sheriff's station in town now. Some might call that paranoid. I call it learning from experience. Working the peach harvest in southern Georgia wasn't my first choice that summer of 2023. But after losing my construction job in March, I needed whatever work I could find. The Garrison family farm outside Valdosta promised steady pay through September, plus housing in their worker barracks. When I arrived in late July, the heat hit like a physical wall, that thick, wet Georgia heat that makes your clothes stick to your skin before you even start working. The barracks were nothing fancy, just converted shipping containers with bunk beds and window AC units that barely kept up with the temperature. I shared my container with 5 other guys, including Miguel, a quiet man from Guatemala who'd been coming to the same farm for 3 seasons straight. He kept to himself mostly, sending money back home to his wife and kids, but he taught me which trees had the ripest fruit and how to avoid the fire ants that built their mounds between the rows. The foreman, a wiry man named Donovan with sun-damaged skin and pale blue eyes, ran the harvest operation with military precision. He'd been with the Garrison family for over a decade, living in a double-wide trailer at the edge of the property. Something about him put everyone on edge. Maybe it was how he'd appear suddenly between the trees when you least expected it, or how he'd dock pay for bruised fruit even when it wasn't your fault. Miguel had warned me on my first day to keep my head down around Donovan, said the man had a temper that could turn on you like a summer storm. The other workers had their own stories about Donovan's moods, whispered conversations in Spanish that would stop whenever he walked past. But the money was decent if you made quota, and I figured I could handle a difficult boss for a few months. Looking back now, I should have paid more attention to the way even the most experienced pickers would tense up when Donovan's white Ford Ranger came bouncing down the dirt roads between the orchards. Everything changed on a Thursday morning in early August when Miguel didn't show up for the 5 a.m. shuttle to the orchards. His bunk was empty, sheets pulled tight like he'd made it before leaving, but his work boots were still under the bed and his phone charger dangled from the outlet. The night before, I'd heard him arguing with Donovan near the equipment shed. Couldn't make out the words through my window, but Miguel's voice had that sharp edge it got when he was upset. He'd been complaining for days about his paycheck being short, said Donovan was skimming hours off everyone's time cards. Most of us had noticed the same thing but kept quiet, afraid of losing our jobs. Miguel had 3 years of perfect attendance at the farm, though, and maybe he thought that counted for something. When I mentioned the empty bunk to our roommates, they exchanged nervous glances. Luis, who'd worked with Miguel the longest, just shook his head and muttered something about Miguel probably catching a ride to town, maybe heading home early. By lunch, everyone was talking about Miguel's absence. Donovan strutted through the orchards with his clipboard, making a show of marking Miguel down as a no-show, telling anyone who'd listen that runners wouldn't get their final paycheck. But Miguel wasn't the type to run. The man had a photo of his family taped above his bunk and called them every Sunday without fail. I tried texting him during our water break, but the messages just showed as delivered, never read. That afternoon, the heat seemed worse than usual, and not just from the sun. Workers kept glancing toward the equipment shed where Miguel had been arguing with Donovan, and conversations died whenever the foreman drove past. Around 3 p.m., I noticed Donovan's truck had fresh mud on the tires and scratch marks along the passenger side, like he'd driven through the thick brush that separated the orchards from the swampland. When he caught me looking, he stared back with those pale eyes until I turned away and got back to picking. That night, Miguel's cousin Antonio arrived from the next farm over, asking if anyone had seen him. The look on Antonio's face when we showed him Miguel's abandoned belongings made my chest tight with worry. The next few days passed in a haze of suspicion and fear. Workers started traveling in groups. Nobody wanted to be alone in the far sections of the orchard, and productivity dropped so much that Donovan was constantly screaming about quotas. On Sunday morning, another worker vanished. Hector, a young guy from Honduras who'd only been at the farm for 2 weeks. This time, there were witnesses. Pablo and Ernesto had seen Hector walking toward the tool shed around 9 p.m. the night before, said Donovan had called him over to discuss documentation issues. Hector never came back to the barracks. His stuff was still there, wallet included, with a bus ticket home dated for the following month. That's when the whispers turned into actual planning. The older workers, men who'd seen too much over the years to ignore the signs, started organizing. They made phone calls to other farms, to legal aid groups, to anyone who might listen. The word huelga, strike, passed from bunk to bunk like a secret prayer. Monday morning arrived with a crimson sunrise that painted the peach trees the color of dried blood. When Donovan showed up with his clipboard for the morning count, he found all 43 workers standing in front of the barracks with arms crossed, nobody moving toward the shuttle vans. Luis stepped forward as our spokesman, his weathered face set with determination. He demanded to know where Miguel and Hector were, said nobody was picking another peach until we got answers. Donovan's face went through several shades of red before settling on a dangerous purple. He threatened to call immigration, to blacklist everyone, to have us all thrown off the property by noon. But Luis stood firm, and we stood behind him. The standoff lasted 2 hours, with Donovan making phone calls and pacing like a caged animal. Finally, old man Garrison himself drove up in his Lincoln Continental, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. After a heated discussion with Donovan that we couldn't hear, Garrison announced he was calling the sheriff's department to file missing persons reports. The relief in our group was palpable, but I noticed Donovan's expression. It wasn't anger anymore, but something closer to calculation, like he was working out a problem in his head. The sheriff's deputies arrived within the hour, 2 units that split up to interview workers and search the property. Most of us didn't have much to tell beyond the timeline of the disappearances, but I made sure to mention the argument between Miguel and Donovan, the fresh damage on the truck, everything I'd noticed. The deputy taking my statement, a young woman with serious eyes, wrote everything down but didn't seem particularly concerned. "Standard procedure," she said. "These things usually sorted themselves out." But around 2 p.m. we heard shouting from the far edge of the orchard where it met the tree line. Through the rows of peach trees I could see deputies running, radios crackling with urgent voices. Word spread through the workers like wildfire. They'd found something. We gathered at the edge of the police tape they were stringing up, close enough to see officers photographing a section of disturbed earth near a drainage ditch. The smell hit us when the wind shifted. Sweet and wrong, nothing like the honest rot of fallen fruit. Luis grabbed my shoulder, his fingers digging in hard, and I knew without being told what they'd found. The excavation took hours, but we couldn't leave, couldn't look away. When they finally brought up the body wrapped in a blue tarp, Antonio let out a sound I'll never forget. Half sob, half scream. Even from a distance, we could see the Guatemala soccer jersey Miguel always wore on Sundays. The sheriff's department immediately cordoned off the entire orchard as a crime scene, and more units kept arriving, including state police and what looked like forensic teams. Donovan was nowhere to be found. His trailer sat empty, truck gone, like he'd vanished into the humid Georgia air. Garrison stood by his Lincoln, face gray with shock, repeating to anyone who'd listened that Donovan had worked for his family for 12 years, that this had to be some kind of mistake. But then one of the workers, Cesar, remembered something. The farm had installed trail cameras last season to catch whoever was stealing equipment. Cesar had helped set them up, knew where they were positioned. He told the deputies about a camera near the tool shed, another by the main road through the orchards. The investigators practically ran to check the footage, leaving us standing there in the brutal afternoon heat, trying to process what was happening. They moved us all to the mess hall while they reviewed the camera footage, deputies taking statements and contact information from every worker. Through the windows, we could see more investigators arriving, some in suits despite the heat. Around 5 p.m., a detective came in and asked specifically for those of us who'd roomed with Miguel. His questions were detailed. When exactly did we last see him? What was his mental state? Had Donovan ever threatened him before? Then he asked something that made my skin crawl. Had any of us noticed Donovan driving through the orchards late at night recently? Several hands went up. Tomas had seen headlights moving through the trees around midnight 3 nights ago. Jorge mentioned hearing an engine revving near the equipment shed after everyone was asleep. The detective's face remained carefully neutral, but I saw him exchange a look with his partner. They thanked us and left, but not before telling us to stay available, that they might have more questions soon. The news came just as the sun was setting, painting the sky the color of overripe peaches. The lead detective gathered us outside the mess hall, his expression grim. They'd found footage, he said, from the night Miguel disappeared. The camera near the main road had captured something around 11:47 p.m. Miguel running through the orchard rows, stumbling, looking back over his shoulder. Then seconds later, headlights. Donovan's white Ford Ranger barreling through the trees, gaining ground. The footage cut out there, the camera's memory card full, but it was enough. They'd issued a warrant for Donovan's arrest, put out an APB across 3 states. The detective wouldn't tell us more about Miguel's condition when they found him, just that the medical examiner would determine the cause of death. But Pablo, who'd helped move the body to the coroner's van, whispered later that he'd seen bruising, signs of violence that made him sick to think about. We all knew then. Miguel hadn't just been killed. He'd been hunted through those trees like an animal, run down by a man who was supposed to be managing the harvest, not harvesting lives. That night, none of us slept. We sat outside the barracks in small groups, sharing cigarettes and memories of Miguel, wondering about Hector and whether they'd find him too. The state police had brought in dogs and ground-penetrating radar, turning the whole farm into a search grid. Around 3 a.m., they found Hector's body in a well on an abandoned section of the property, weighed down with concrete blocks. The same pattern of injuries, the detective told us later, evidence of being struck by a vehicle. By dawn, the farm was swarming with federal investigators, news vans lined up along the county road, helicopters circling overhead. Garrison had lawyers present now, claiming complete ignorance of his foreman's actions. But more stories started emerging. Workers from previous seasons coming forward, talking about people who'd disappeared, about Donovan's threats, about wages withheld and violence implied. Luis told the investigators about a Haitian worker from 2021 who'd vanished after complaining about pay, another from 2020 who'd supposedly gone home in the middle of the night. The scope of what might have been happening at that farm for years was staggering. They caught Donovan 3 days later at a truck stop in Alabama, sleeping in his Ford Ranger with dried blood still on the front bumper and Miguel's wallet in the glove compartment. He claimed it was all a misunderstanding, that Miguel had attacked him first, that Hector had tried to steal from the farm. But the evidence told a different story, a pattern of violence against workers who challenged him, who demanded fair wages, who threatened his little kingdom of fear. The trial made national news, especially when they expanded the search and found 3 more bodies on the property, workers from previous years that no one had reported missing because who was going to listen to illegal immigrants disappearing from farms? In the end, Donovan got life without parole, and the Garrison farm was shut down permanently. I left Georgia right after giving my testimony, drove straight through to my sister's place in Ohio without stopping. Sometimes I still dream about those peach trees and the sound of Miguel running through them in the dark. I work construction again now, and whenever young guys talk about easy money picking fruit down south, I tell them this story. I tell them about Miguel, who just wanted his fair wages, and Hector, who was barely 22, and all the others whose names we might never know. And I tell them to be careful who they trust with their lives, because sometimes the real harvest is something much darker than fruit. The afternoon stretched lazily across our Montana property, 300 acres of wheat and pasture that had been in my family for 4 generations. I was 15 that August, skinny and sunburned from helping with the harvest, counting down the days until school started again. My friend Allison lived on the neighboring ranch, about 2 miles as the crow flies, but nearly 4 if you took the dirt roads. That particular Saturday, my parents had driven into Billings for supplies, leaving me with chores and a promise that I could visit Allison once everything was done. The dishes were washed, the chickens fed, and by 2 o'clock I was lacing up my hiking boots, ready to take the shortcut through the woods that separated our properties. My grandfather had passed away 3 winters before, leaving behind a workshop full of rusty tools and hunting gear that nobody had bothered to sort through yet. He'd been a trapper in his younger days, back when pelts brought good money and nobody questioned the methods. The old man had dementia near the end, would wander the property at night setting snares for animals that hadn't lived here in decades. We thought we'd found all his equipment after he died, thought we'd cleared the dangerous stuff. My dad had spent a whole weekend pulling wire snares from the fence posts and collecting the small game traps from around the barn. But our land was vast, with forgotten corners where the forest grew thick and wild, places even we rarely ventured into. The shortcut through the woods saved me almost an hour of walking. I'd taken it dozens of times before, following a deer trail that wound between massive ponderosa pines and through a clearing where wildflowers bloomed purple and yellow in the summer heat. The path was overgrown in places, branches catching at my tank top and scratching my arms, but I knew every twist and turn. About halfway through, the trail dipped into a shallow ravine where a creek used to run before it dried up years ago. The ground there stayed damp even in August, moss clinging to the rocks and ferns growing in thick clusters. I hopped down the small embankment, my boots squelching slightly in the muddy bottom, humming some pop song that had been stuck in my head all morning. The steel teeth bit through my ankle before I even registered stepping on anything unusual. The pain hit like lightning, shooting up my leg and stealing every bit of air from my lungs. I went down hard, my knee twisting as I fell, hands clawing at the dirt. When I tried to pull away, the trap's grip only tightened, those rusty jaws clamping deeper into flesh and tendon. The device was massive, way bigger than anything meant for rabbits or foxes. This was built for bears or wolves, creatures that hadn't roamed freely here since my grandfather was young. The chain attached to it disappeared into the earth, anchored to something deep underground. Blood was already pooling inside my boot, warm and sticky, turning the brown leather dark. For the first few minutes I just screamed. Not for help. I knew nobody would hear me out here, but from pure animal panic. My fingers fumbled with the trap's mechanism, trying to pry the jaws apart, but the springs were too strong and the rust had sealed parts of it shut. Every movement sent fresh waves of agony through my body. The metal had gone straight through muscle, and I could feel it grinding against bone when I shifted even slightly. My phone was sitting uselessly on my bedroom dresser where I'd forgotten it that morning. Allison wouldn't worry when I didn't show up. She'd assume my parents had changed their minds about letting me visit. My folks weren't due back until after dark, maybe 8 or 9 o'clock if they stopped for dinner in town like they usually did. The sun moved across the sky with agonizing slowness. I tried everything I could think of, using sticks as levers, digging at the chain's anchor point with my bare hands until my fingernails were torn and bloody, even attempting to slip my foot out of my boot. Nothing worked. The trap held firm. Its teeth sunk too deep, and every effort left me weaker and dizzier from blood loss. By evening, the temperature started dropping the way it does in Montana, going from blazing hot to teeth-chattering cold as soon as the sun touched the mountains. I'd worn shorts and a tank top, perfect for a summer afternoon, useless for a night in the woods. The ravine that had seemed so pleasant earlier now felt like a pit, the walls too steep to climb even if I hadn't been chained to the ground. The first wolf appeared just after sunset, a shadow moving between the trees above the ravine. Then another, and another. They didn't come close at first, just circled along the rim, their eyes catching the last bit of light like yellow coins. I'd seen wolves before. They'd been reintroduced to the area years ago, and sometimes we'd spot them from the truck, but never this close, never when I was hurt and alone. They could smell the blood, I knew that much. Could probably sense how weak I was getting. I gathered every rock within reach, piling them beside me like ammunition. When one of them ventured down into the ravine, maybe 20 feet away, I hurled a stone as hard as I could. It yelped and scrambled back up, but they didn't leave. They just kept circling, waiting, their patience infinite. Night in those woods was darker than anything I'd experienced. No streetlights, no house lights, just the faint glow of stars through the pine canopy. The cold seeped into my bones, making me shake uncontrollably, which only made the trap grind deeper into my ankle. I could hear things moving in the darkness. Not just the wolves, but smaller creatures rustling through the underbrush, owls calling from the trees. Every sound made me grip my dwindling pile of rocks tighter. Sometimes the wolves would howl, long, mournful sounds that seemed to come from every direction at once. I tried to stay awake, terrified of what might happen if I passed out, but the blood loss and exhaustion kept pulling me under. I'd jerk awake to find glowing eyes closer than before, and I'd throw another rock, screaming hoarsely to scare them back. Dawn came slowly, the sky turning from black to deep purple to pale gray. The wolves had vanished with the darkness, leaving only their tracks in the mud around me. My ankle had swollen grotesquely overnight, the skin purple and black where the trap's teeth held it. The pain had transformed into something else, a constant throbbing presence that made thinking difficult. But I knew I had to move. My parents would be awake soon, would find my empty bed and start searching. I needed to get closer to where they might look. Using a thick branch as a crutch, I began the horrible process of dragging myself and the trap up the ravine wall. Every inch was agony. The chain was only about 6 feet long, so I'd move forward until it went taut, then have to dig and pull at the anchor point, loosening it just enough to gain another foot or two. It took me 4 hours to travel what should have been a 5-minute walk. 4 hours of crawling, dragging, stopping to vomit from the pain, then forcing myself to continue. The trap must have weighed 30 pounds, and with every movement it twisted and pulled at the mangled flesh of my ankle. I left a trail of blood through the ferns and moss, marked my path with broken branches and disturbed earth. By the time I reached the edge of the woods where our wheat field began, I could hear the distant sound of our truck's engine. My vision kept going dark around the edges, but I pulled myself into the open field, into the blazing morning sun where they'd be able to see me. I remember my mother's scream carrying across the wheat, remember my father running toward me, his face white with horror. Then nothing. I woke up in the hospital 3 days later, my left leg ending at the knee. The doctor said the trap had crushed too many bones, severed too many nerves, and infection had set in despite their efforts. They'd had to use specialized equipment just to remove the trap. Those old bear traps were designed never to let go, and this one had rusted shut after decades buried in the earth. The game warden who investigated found 14 more traps scattered across our property, some buried so deep that only their chains were visible. All of them were illegal, had been illegal for 50 years or more. My grandfather had apparently spent his final confused years creating a minefield that nobody knew existed, placing traps in random locations that only made sense to his fractured mind. The investigation made the local news, warning other families to check their properties for old trapping equipment. 2 more farms in our county found similar hazards hidden in their woods. I spent months learning to walk with a prosthetic, longer learning to trust the ground beneath my feet again. Even now, 10 years later, I can't walk through tall grass without looking down, can't step anywhere I can't see clearly. My parents sold the farm the following year. Too many memories, too much guilt. They still blame themselves for not searching every inch of those 300 acres. But honestly, who would think to look for bear traps in places bears hadn't lived for generations? Who expects danger like that on their own land? Sometimes the most terrifying things aren't strangers or monsters. They're the forgotten dangers left behind by people we loved, waiting patiently in the dark for someone to stumble across them. I grew up in a quiet stretch of farmland just outside Spencer, Indiana. One of those places where you can go an entire afternoon hearing nothing but cicadas and the occasional low rumble of a truck passing on gravel. My dad, Warren, ran a small equipment repair shop out of our property, and we had this big old red tractor that he'd bought used from a neighbor. Most Saturdays I'd hang around while he worked, sometimes sweeping up, sometimes just watching. That day, I remember the air being thick and humid, with a gray sky that threatened rain but never followed through. I was 10, eager to be useful, always looking for ways to show my dad I was more than just a tag-along. We were out behind the shed, next to the cornfield where the grass always grew a little higher than anywhere else. The tractor had been giving him trouble, something about the hydraulic lift not locking in place. He had it jacked up with one of those massive shop lifts, and he'd slid underneath with a socket wrench, mumbling to himself the way he always did when he was deep in thought. I stood nearby, shifting from foot to foot, watching the way his boots stuck out from under the frame. At some point he asked me to grab a tool from the open case beside me, something simple like a flathead. I handed it to him, proud to be helping. While he kept working, I noticed the lever for the lift. It looked stiff, and I thought maybe I could help by nudging it slightly so it would click into place. He hadn't told me to touch it. I just assumed I was doing him a favor. I remember placing both hands on it and giving it a little push. There was a hissing sound like air escaping a tire, and then this awful mechanical groan as the lift began to lower. I didn't realize what was happening until I heard him yell. Not a word, just this raw, choked sound that shot straight through me. I panicked and tried to pull the lever back up, but it was stuck. I ran around to the side and saw the lift had dropped all the way down onto his torso. His legs were kicking slightly, then stopped. I didn't know what to do. I started screaming for help, but we were too far from the house for anyone to hear. I ended up running barefoot because I'd kicked my shoes off earlier, through the mud and gravel back to the porch to grab the cordless phone. I remember punching 911 with hands slippery from sweat and grime. I couldn't think straight. I just kept repeating, "He's under the tractor. He's stuck. Please send someone." The ambulance arrived fast, or at least faster than I thought was possible out there. I remember sitting on the steps covered in dirt, my legs scratched from the weeds, while 2 paramedics and one of the volunteer firefighters worked to raise the lift again. Dad was still breathing, but it was shallow, and his eyes were wide like he was looking at something that wasn't even there. They talked in short, sharp phrases. "Stabilize internal trauma. Get him to the hospital now." I couldn't look away from the deep indent left on his shirt where the lift had pressed down. It didn't seem real that something so solid could leave a mark like that on a person. He made it through the ride to the hospital, and even through the night. The doctors told us he had multiple fractures and they were concerned about bleeding they couldn't immediately locate. Mom stayed by his side, barely blinking, while I sat outside the room with a cup of vending machine cocoa that had gone cold. Every few minutes, a nurse or tech would walk past and glance at me, like they weren't sure if I was part of the family or just lost. I kept expecting someone to yell at me, to say what I'd done, but no one did. The guilt was already crawling through me like something alive. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. 3 days later, around noon, he was gone. They said it was a complication, something internal that ruptured suddenly. The word suddenly didn't sit right with me. Nothing about it had felt sudden. It felt like it had been waiting. I didn't go to the funeral. I stayed in the barn, in the far corner where the hay bales were stacked against the wall, and I didn't come out until well after everyone had left. Mom didn't even come looking for me. I think she knew I needed to be alone. I kept going over it in my head. What I did, what I touched, how I shouldn't have. It wasn't until nearly a year later that I found the safety block. It was bright orange, with a chipped corner, and had been shoved behind a stack of old buckets in the barn. That thing was always supposed to go under the lift as a precaution. My dad never worked under anything hydraulic without using it. Never. And yet that day, it hadn't been there. I don't know if he forgot, or if we were in a rush, or maybe he assumed I'd seen him put it in place, but it wasn't there. I sat there staring at it for hours like it would give me some kind of answer. All it gave me was silence, and maybe a little less blame. I didn't tell anyone about the safety block. Not right away. For years, I carried the weight of what happened like it was branded onto me. Anytime someone mentioned my dad, even in passing, I'd tense up, expecting the story to come up. But no one ever blamed me, at least not out loud. People in town mostly said it was a freak accident. A tragedy, they'd call it, or one of those things you just can't predict. But I knew the truth wasn't that clean. It lived in the gaps, like how a 10-year-old kid should never be left near a control lever, or how a safety block that was always used just happened to be forgotten that day. It changed me. I stopped going into the barn. I stopped hanging around machines. I avoided that tractor like it had grown teeth. Eventually, Mom sold it to someone a few towns over. I didn't say goodbye to it. That probably sounds strange, but for me, that machine had become something else entirely. It didn't matter that it wasn't alive. In my head, it had taken something from me. The sight of it made my chest feel tight, like I was bracing for something to go wrong all over again. Years later, when I was older, I finally told my uncle about the block. He'd worked with my dad often and knew how meticulous he was. I half expected him to tell me I was wrong, that the block must have been somewhere else, that I'd imagined it. But he just nodded slowly, like he'd been waiting for me to say it. "Warren didn't cut corners," he said. but even the careful ones miss something once in a while. It didn't erase anything, but it helped me shift the weight a little, made it feel like maybe I hadn't been the only reason that day went sideways. I still think about it, especially on quiet mornings when the sky looks like it did that day, gray and full of promises it never keeps. I never went into machinery or repair like I thought I might. Ended up working in a library, actually. Funny how life reroutes you. I still carry pieces of that day, and I probably always will. But I've learned to stop letting it define who I am. I was just a kid who made a mistake. A terrible one, yes, but not a malicious one. And some part of me, some stubborn, childlike part, still hopes my dad knew that. I wasn't planning to move back to the farm. It was never part of the plan, not even after the divorce. But when the papers were signed and the house sold quicker than I expected, I needed somewhere stable, somewhere familiar. So I packed up my Subaru with what was left of our life and drove my son Tyler back to the place I hadn't set foot in since 2009. The farm had been in our family for generations, tucked about 20 minutes outside a small town called Fairgrove, Missouri. It still smelled like dust and old wood, and the floorboards creaked in the exact same places they used to when I was a kid. We moved in mid-September, just before the first cold snap, and tried to settle into some kind of rhythm. Tyler wasn't thrilled. He was 16 and used to sidewalks, gas stations, and late-night gaming with his friends. Here, the internet barely worked, and the nearest neighbor was a good half-mile away. But he tried. I'll give him that. We'd spend the evenings on the back porch, me with a cup of tea, him sulking with his earbuds in, and watch the trees shift from green to gold. He helped me clean out the barn, carried boxes up to the attic, even fixed the screen door after it slammed one too many times. It felt like maybe, just maybe, this place would help us both catch our breath. That afternoon started like any other. I'd gone into town to pick up groceries and swing by the post office. Tyler had waved me off from the porch, wearing that old hoodie with the sleeves too long, headphones hanging around his neck. He said he might ride his bike along the old gravel path behind the shed, just to kill time. I remember smiling and telling him to stay where I could find him. The drive to town takes about 25 minutes each way, plus another 30 or so running errands. I wasn't gone more than 2 hours, tops. But when I pulled back into the driveway, something felt unbalanced. The front door was wide open. At first, I thought maybe I'd forgotten to shut it properly. But then I noticed Tyler's bike. It was lying sideways in the grass just past the porch steps, still with one pedal slowly turning like it had been dropped seconds before. There was a half-drunk bottle of root beer next to it, condensation still clinging to the plastic. I called his name, assuming he'd just stepped into the shed or wandered toward the edge of the property. But there was no answer. Not from the shed, not from the barn, not from anywhere. I walked around the side of the house, and that's when I saw the footprints, barely visible in the dirt, deep, heavy, and leading straight into the cornfield. The thing is, we hadn't planted corn in years, not since my uncle passed. What was left of the field was mostly tall weeds and old stalks, some of them brittle and gray, others somehow still standing like they refused to give up. I followed the tracks, careful not to call Tyler's name too loud in case he was playing some kind of joke. But with every step, the quiet pressed harder against me. No wind, no insects. Even the crows, usually loud near dusk, were gone. All I could hear was the dry crunch beneath my boots and my own breath growing uneven. About 50 feet in, I saw something red between the stalks. For a second, I thought it was blood, and I nearly lost it right there. But as I pushed through, I saw it was just Tyler's hoodie, balled up and lying in the dirt like he'd yanked it off mid-run. Next to it was one of his earbuds, the cord stretched out and knotted like it had been torn from his pocket. I called his name again, louder this time, panic setting in. Still nothing. I kept walking, now following broken stalks and bits of torn leaves that curved deeper into the field. Then I found his phone. Screen cracked, still playing music through the other dangling earbud. Volume low, but still audible. The timestamp said the song had been playing for only 7 minutes. That's when I realized something was seriously wrong. I was maybe 100 yards in, and the air suddenly felt thicker, like it didn't want me there. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, nothing obvious. But the way his things were scattered felt wrong. Too clean, too quiet. I turned around and couldn't even see the house anymore. Just rows and rows of dry stalks. And then I heard it. Not a voice, not a sound I could place. More like a breath. Long, slow, and steady. Somewhere ahead of me, but not human. Like someone was exhaling through a throat that had forgotten how. I didn't move. I stood there holding Tyler's phone in one hand and trying to pinpoint where it came from. Then I heard something shift to my left. Not footsteps. Something dragging. Something heavier than a person. I turned toward the noise, but all I could see were the stalks swaying ever so slightly, like something had passed through just seconds before. That's when my instincts finally kicked in. I turned and ran, straight back through the path I'd made coming in, heart racing, legs burning. The air felt colder now, the silence even deeper, like the field itself was watching me leave. When I burst out of the cornfield, I expected to see Tyler waiting on the porch, maybe laughing, maybe annoyed. But the yard was empty. The sun had dipped just below the tree line, painting everything in that deep orange that makes shadows stretch like they're reaching for something. I called 911 without even thinking. The dispatcher kept asking if he might have run off, if he had a history of this kind of behavior. I tried to stay calm, but I could hear it in my own voice. I didn't believe this was just a missing person case. Not after what I'd seen. Not after that sound. Deputies showed up about 20 minutes later, a pair of cruisers kicking up gravel and dust as they pulled in. I told them everything. The hoodie, the earbuds, the phone, the sound in the field. One of the younger officers walked me back out there, retracing my steps. We found the hoodie and the phone exactly where I said they were. But the strange part? The footprints were gone. Completely. Even the broken stalks looked like they'd never been disturbed. The path I'd used to run back, sealed up tight, like the field had healed itself. They brought in dogs the next morning. Tyler's scent was picked up near the porch by the bike, and again where the hoodie was. But beyond that, nothing. It was like he'd vanished between one row of corn and the next. For 3 days, the search continued. Drones, helicopters, volunteers combing the woods and fields in every direction. They even brought in thermal cameras. Not a trace. No torn clothing, no body, no signs of struggle. Just gone. Like the field had swallowed him whole. I stayed on that farm for 3 more weeks. Part of me hoped he'd just walk up the steps one night like nothing had happened. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat right. I kept hearing that breath sometimes, late at night just past the window. A slow, deliberate inhale like it was testing the air for me. I left on a Monday, locked the door, left the key under the mat, and never looked back. The house is still there, I think. I don't know. I can't bring myself to check. All I know is if you ever find yourself walking near an old cornfield and everything suddenly goes quiet, don't go in looking for someone. You might not be the one who comes back.